Good. Well, here we go. We're going to start here, Bruce. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the ICR Conference Spotlight Series. I'll give you just a minute behind the thought process here. For those that don't know, ICR has done a huge investor conference for 27 years. This year we had over 3,000 people in Orlando, and it's a real networking event where companies and private equity and bankers and other experts come together and we share information. And we said to ourselves, why are we doing this for just 3 days once a year? Why not carry it through the entire year and do different events branded under the ICR conference banner? And we're proud to bring our first event to everybody today. We have Bruce Mehlman here. He's going to talk about the implications of a Trump administration on business and communications and everything. I think everyone's going to benefit from it. Bruce held senior positions in the George W. Bush administration and on Capitol Hill. He helps leaders and organizations understand, anticipate, and navigate political risk. And he'll provide a detailed overview of the Trump administration, its priorities, personnel actions to date, and some guidance on how business leaders can best position their organizations for success over the coming years. We thank him very much for being part of this inaugural event. And with that, Bruce, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Tom, thanks. It's an honor to be part of the inaugural event here, and I hope this won't be the first and only based upon however this goes with me. As folks who perhaps have been to events that I've done before know, I like to share slides, which I'm going to do, and it's a presentation on exactly what you described. Talking about the trends and where we are. Real quick, Jade or someone, can you confirm you see the slides and I'm good to go? Well, I'm not hearing anybody. I'm going to assume
you're all good, Bruce.
Oh, great. Thank you. Sorry to make the voice of God come in, but you wouldn't want to talk to an empty screen, or at least I wouldn't want to. So I'm going to talk about how we got here, where we're going, what businesses need to do. Here are my bottom lines up front, which I always thought was appreciated, particularly given the East Coast, it's lunchtime. You may be eating lunch. By the time I'm done, you may have moved on to happy hour because I'm talking about politics today. But number one, boards, companies, leaders within organizations need to prepare more and better. We're in an era of unpredictability, but a lot of the unpredictability is predictable. If you deepen your risk assessment, contingency planning, and internal cross-coordination, you can be better ready for what's coming. Number two, you better adapt. If your theory is, that we're in this kind of fever dream, but the populism, the nationalism, the culture wars caused by the internet, they're going to go away and it's going to be back to the world we all lived in, you're wrong. We need to evolve what we say, how we say it, where we invest and operate, how we advocate. Bottom line number three, there are plenty of things that were, are, and will forever be true. We need to play the long game in business. Research and development matters. Innovation and innovative products and services are always going to win. You got to control your costs. Talent is everything. In the advocacy world that I'm in, stay bipartisan. There is never a party that takes over and stays in control. It goes back and forth. You need friends on both sides. Right now, it feels like it's only the White House driving everything around the world. That won't persist. You need to focus on Congress as well, not only the U.S., but also global, and avoid overreacting. I'm going to go through 10 trends, but before I do it, I think it's worth a couple of words on how we got here. The world that brought us Donald Trump, Trump is a symptom more than a cause. And the world is one where, from the start of this century, people have increasingly been angry and afraid. And that was at a bit of a fever pitch heading into 2024. Economically, we saw this economy that benefits those with more skills, those who are better on technology. We saw record income inequality, both among firms with high concentration among big leaders, but also among individuals. And heading into 2024 and possibly returning, I'm looking at you, Eggs, we saw food inflation hitting a lot of the Americans who felt like that the coasts weren't thinking about them, and they wanted somebody who'd stand up for them. Globally, what more and more people around the world concluded is that globalization benefits the people who go to Davos, the big global multinationals, but it screws them in their small town, which lost the factory or lost the jobs, or lost the work. So we've seen this backlash against globalization. And if you thought the war was a scary place prior to 2022, suddenly Europe is the biggest war since World War II. In Europe, we saw the Middle East as a flame. Asia is a tinderbox. People are afraid and they're angry about what's happening around the world. Socially, the internet's rise meant not only do people disagree about things, but it was front and center. Suddenly, everybody was a publisher. Everybody could attack a brand. And the voices that are on the internet, even though we know intellectually they're the narrowest 5% on each side, they feel overwhelming because the algorithms make us see and hear the most those which are most outrageous, most likely to get engagement. And if things felt like they were falling apart before, the 4 years before the election, we'd seen the spike in crime as a result of the pandemic. We'd seen, according to the New York Times, the most illegal immigration over the southern border in American history. We saw the loss of what was presumed to be a sacrosanct civil constitutional right of abortion after 5 decades. How people feel? Angry, afraid. Finally, politically, we saw the first non-peaceful transfer of power in our lifetimes. I'd go back to the Civil War with the last one, and that was a slower burn than just a couple of months. In January 6, 2021, for the first time since 1968, we saw a major party candidate drop out, replaced by the sitting vice president who had not been on any ballot as a candidate themselves. And on the other side, we saw the first assassination attempt of a major president since Hinckley shot Reagan in 81. People felt like the world is coming apart and they're unhappy about it. And they look at the institutions that govern our lives in the 20th century and they said, do we still trust them? And according to the Gallup data, looking at measures of trust, those who had quite a great deal or quite a lot of trust in schools and labor and banks and big business and Congress saw that trust erode. So how we got to now, you have a world that is increasingly being disrupted by new technology, by changes, by things that make people angry and afraid. You have no trust in institutions. So what do people do? They vote for change. Throw the bums out, bring in new bums. So how often were there change elections in the United States in the 60s and the 70s? There were 10 elections every 2 years. Of those 10, 3 saw the party controlling the House, the Senate, and or the White House change hands. If you fast forward, you've got the 80s and the 90s. That brings 10 more federal elections. Of those 10, 4 were change elections. This century, we've now had 13 federal elections in the United States. Of those 13, 11 have been change elections. What this represents is, I believe, when people think about the policies and the parties and the institutions that govern our lives, they conclude they were created in the 20th century to deal with the problems of the 20th century. And for so many people, there aren't rules or laws or behaviors that help you parent in an age of social media, that help you as a brand understand what to do when you suddenly get attacked online, perhaps, driven by foreign influencers. There's all kind of realities that we don't think the world has us ready for. And you know what? We're voting for change. Maybe somebody else can figure it out. That's what got us here. Here's where we're going. 10 trends to watch. Number 1, it's the same president, but a different presidency. 2025 is not 2017. First, attitudinally, Donald Trump was one of the least prepared people to ever become president in 2017. If you haven't been president, there's a whole lot to learn. He was president for 4 years and he spent 4 more years thinking about what he'd do differently. He may be the most prepared person to ever take the presidency. He's aggressive. He's only got 4 years and he knows he may lose the House in 2 years. He's in a hurry. The first time he showed up, he was there. The establishment didn't want him. It was all about tearing things down. I think whether you like it or not, he has a vision. He wants to rebuild the world in a new and different way. So he's thinking legacy in a way he wasn't before. Politically, recall the so-called Women's March happened before his inauguration in 2017. The Democratic Party got into resistance mode on day one, stayed there. That powered them taking back the House in 2018. The Dems at the moment are in disarray. When Trump was first elected, the Republicans assume, John Boehner in the House, Mitch McConnell in the Senate, they'd be able to control the guy. At this point, he dominates the GOP, largely because there is this MAGA ecosystem on social media, on cable, that goes after aggressively anybody who's not on sides for Donald Trump. That is very powerful. And at the moment, it's keeping every Republican afraid and on sides. Globally, when he was president the first time, the world was fundamentally peaceful and disinflationary. Neither of those things are true as we start his second term. The U.S. is relatively stronger economically. Remember, in 2017, we all thought it was only a matter of years before China dominated. Now they're struggling economically. The U.S., despite a whole lot of issues and not counting debt, is pretty darn strong economically otherwise. The stock market, there's more global wealth in the U.S. stock market than most others combined. Hell, there's more wealth in the Mag 7 than most stock markets combined. Trump was the number 20 out of 20, least experienced G20 leader the first time around. He's the fourth most experienced G20 leader this time around. What hasn't changed? There is a high level of chaos that works for him. He likes saying things that shock. He likes being unpredictable. He likes having some advisors who seem like they were super hostile on China and others like Elon Musk, less hostile on China. He does not appear to have much ideology. He is much more transactional. How do you get the best deal for the country or for himself and the presidency? If you challenge him, he hits you back twice as hard. So if you're Zelensky and you say something he doesn't like, he's going to claim you're a dictator who started the war, which of course is not true and kind of crazy. But you punch him, he's coming at you with a gun. Number two, Washington, D.C. normally has the bandwidth for one big fight at a time. In 2009, 2010, it was Obamacare, healthcare reform. Then it became the so-called Simpson-Bowles super committee focusing on deficit spending. By 2013, it was the Gang of Eight, and the Senate spent more than half a year crafting and passing, you may not even remember, bipartisan immigration reform. It never saw the light of day in the House. 2017, 2018, the town got sucked into the focus on tax reform. Then it became Trump trade wars. We hadn't seen a nationalist, non-globalist presidency in a really long time. Suddenly, we arguably parts of Reagan, we were back into trade wars. When Biden comes in, his first 2 years are all about the industrial policy, infrastructure, CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, which was really Green New Deal-y. Every one of these topics, major changes to healthcare, industrial policy, trade wars, got to do tax again, dealing with the deportations in the border, and how do we massively cut spending, are all happening all right now, everywhere, every fight, all at once. Trend number three, how's it going for Trump? Well, if you don't like him, you will point out accurately that he is net negative in his approval. This is the real clear politics average of polls. He's net positive in some polls. He's net negative in other polls. The net is your favorability minus your unfavorability. Trump is about 1 point underwater, which on the one hand doesn't mean that everybody is psyched and loving you, but look where he's been since he showed up politically. He's been in double digits. His -1, and he briefly was positive, is the best he's ever seen. So, and his support among his base, among Republicans, is 91%. He feels like he's getting a lot of positive feedback from the political marketplace right now. If you think about every single cabinet official that he has nominated, with one Matt Gaetz exception, has been confirmed. Number four, what are the big Trump initiatives? Well, the first thing he ran on is that tariffs are the greatest, most beautiful word in the English language. And the trade wars that he promised, that he believed helped succeed in the first term, that he thinks will help raise revenue, that he thinks will accelerate our economic growth, that he thinks will help stop wars and improve our foreign policy, full speed ahead. He is moving on a daily basis with all deliberate speed. If you think we just like to know what's going to happen, the answer is we're going to have trade wars and proposed tariffs that are going to come again and again. If you're not happy with fentanyl entering this country, tariff Mexico, China, and Canada unless they comply. Whatever the issue is, this is his first weapon of choice. As I said at the outset, you may say, "Oh my God, how do we how do we work our supply chain in such an unpredictable environment? The unpredictability is kind of predictable. So, if your supply chain is 100% on China, you've got a problem. So you're probably working on that. But it could be other places where you have challenges too. Maybe you need to have thicker inventory. Maybe you need to do a better job with currency hedging to understand how the tariffs could lead to changes in currency market in places you get paid. Extreme budget cutting. We knew that they've got the debt ceiling. There's on the 14th, the government's going to shut down, I believe, starting 15th, the Ides of March. Theoretically, they could cut a deal, but you need Democratic votes, and I can't fathom any Democrat will agree to a spending deal that Elon Musk doesn't have to respect. And the last spending deal they had has been ignored by the White House and the so-called Doge initiative led by Elon Musk, which means the Democrats aren't going to vote for yes until they're assured that if you agree to spending, the spending will happen. I think that means we're going to be in a shutdown for a bit here going forward. I also think we may have uncertainty on the debt ceiling longer than we should. If they don't do anything about taxes, the so-called Trump tax cuts expire. That's $4.5 to $5 trillion tax increase, not C corps, but otherwise almost everywhere, including individuals. Everybody is incentivized to fix it. The Republicans are trying to do this on a Republican-only bill, but there is disagreement among the GOP of how much spending you need to cut to pay for some of these or not. Not only did Trump want to extend his tax cuts from last time, he wants to add no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, and other things he campaigned on. This fight has a deadline of the 31st of December. It made a lot of noise early on, but it's the early innings. It's the budget deals which set up the ability to do tax reconciliation. We think this one's going to drag through a lot of the year. And the president campaigned on the desire and the need to have large deportation of individuals who are not, undocumented individuals in this country. It polled net positive, so more than 50% of Americans agree with it. Let's see as it goes into practice. Let's see as people in your neighborhood or in your church are deported. Or according to the USDA, the 40% of ag workers who are undocumented, I don't think they're all going to get bounced. But if they all get bounced, eggs are not the only thing whose prices are going to go way up. Besides those big four, and for those who are like, holy cow, I'm drinking from a fire hose, it's number 5 of 10 before I end with 3 recommendations and we turn to Q's and A's. There's a lot of other aggressive action across government, similar in direction, but often more far-reaching than Trump 1.0. So recall in Trump 1.0, he said, what has the other guy's name on it? That was Obamacare. He wanted to kill it because it was not his, it was Obama's. So what are the major Biden initiatives? Well, one of them was the artificial intelligence executive order. All right, he killed that. He's killed a ton of the Biden initiatives. There are other things like infrastructure or chips, which are pretty well aligned with what Trump would want to have happen. But I think he's going to want to go in and take out elements of them he doesn't like, sort of put a fresh coat of gold paint and make them his own, to quote the great political scholar Randy Jackson from American Idol. The president campaigned on, I'm going to get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion in the federal government. And we've been advising clients for months. We think they're also going to go after private sector, aggressive DEI and ESG, but especially DEI initiatives. They're going to have the Justice Department bring civil rights lawsuits against those who, albeit with the goal of correcting historic wrongs, who discriminate on the basis of race, in favor of historically disadvantaged groups. But discrimination is discrimination, according to the Supreme Court in 2022 and according to the Department of Justice right now. They want to purge the deep state. They want to overhaul the bureaucracy. It seems to me that they're approaching this not trying to figure out who are the weakest 10% and let's fire them, but rather who are the easiest people to fire anybody that we can fire tomorrow. That's not a way anybody on this call runs their business, because you want to keep your best and brightest. A lot of the best and brightest are provisional employees, but they're also the easiest to fire, and they're the ones that Musk has been going after early on. They claim, not last time they said cut 2 regulations for every one, and led by Russ, vote at OMB. They did that. This time they claim it's going to be 10-1, which is tough to do. They're going to be a lot less aggressive on antitrust, except some of the big tech guys may find that's not true. Trump, I assumed, was going to take the government's thumb off the scale. The thumb has been on the scale in favor of the energy transition, in favor of green. And I figure he'd say, let's make it an even fight, but he hates windmills, and he seems to be going after EV and other green subsidies to favor fossil fuels. So, we know we need, I should say my viewpoint, we need an all of the above energy strategy. We need a ton more electricity to power AI and to otherwise deal with the challenges that we've got, ideally in ways that are less long-term environmental problematic. In the short term, they are aggressively trying to make it easier for America the strategy is called the energy dominance strategy. We'll see if that includes support for things like solar, which a true dominance strategy would include. And finally, the 78-year-old, born in 1946 president is the leading crypto bro in the country. Go figure. Also, his advisors this time, he didn't have much in tech the first time around. He had a lot of tech VC types who were encouraging him to be pro open source artificial intelligence. The big political thing is to stop the censorship of the platforms. And I think we're going to continue to see an effort to accelerate defense technology. Number 6 of 10. There's not been a lot that Donald Trump, as a public figure, has been consistent on. He was a Democrat. He was an independent. He supported fundraised for Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton. But something he's been totally consistent on is he thinks the trade policies that the United States has advanced play us for suckers, undermine us. And increasingly, we're seeing in the U.S. and around the world the belief that we need to be more resilient. We need to figure out what matters to America, and we need to support that. And so we're seeing subsidies, whether it was green tech or infrastructure with Biden or semiconductors. The U.S. passed the CHIPS Act because if our most advanced semiconductors are made in an island 100 miles off the coast of China, we're really vulnerable. In the same way with the pandemic when all of the PPE was made in China. So we have a CHIPS Act. Well, Japan doesn't want to lose their position in semiconductors, so they have a CHIPS Act. And the EU passed a CHIPS Act. Korea has the same equivalent. China subsidizes more than everybody else combined to try to have a position in semiconductor and semiconductor equipment. If everybody is subsidizing the same stuff, what does that lead to? Gluts, excess capacity. So we're seeing, especially in China, which has an anemic domestic market right now as a result of the real estate bust, they're shipping more manufactured goods around the world, trying to export their way out of their economic crisis. But that is leading to historic trade deficits, both with the U.S. and with the rest of the world, which means if you're in Detroit or if you're in Stuttgart, that was a nice auto industry while we had it, unless you say, well, I'm going to impose some bans or tariffs or some buy local procurement preferences, more export controls, and we're seeing this new protectionism around the world. The U.S. under President Trump wants to reindustrialize. If we went to war with China tomorrow, we would lose. They don't want that to happen. So they're trying to figure out how do we get in front of that. And that impacts their trade policy, their tax policy, their procurement policy. This will continue the rest of this decade. This is a not unfair depiction of the Biden administration's approach to industrial policy. This would have been the Harris approach to industrial policy. If you're a business, you better adapt how you think about global markets, how you think about inventory management, how you think about supply chain, how you think about currency management. Well, what might slow the president down? Well, one thing, you think a resistance is going to return? He continues to say things which make a lot of people's heads explode and do things that are themselves not always popular. If you're a political nerd like I am, you may have heard of the thermostatic theory of politics. If it's hot, you turn the thermostat down. If it's cold, you turn the thermostat up. The activism tends to rise against the party that's in power. So when George W. Bush was president, you saw the birth of the Bernie left. First, they were anti the Iraq War. By the end, they were anti-Wall Street as the Occupy movement got born and the collapse happened. That helped select Barack Obama. Barack Obama's president. The left activists are trying to work with this administration to do what they hope he will do. The outside activism, the agitation's on the right. It starts with the Tea Party at the beginning of his term. It ends with the MAGA movement, which leads to the election of Donald Trump. Where's the activism and energy? everywhere on the left at the same time turned up to 11, which helps elect Joe Biden. Where's the activism over the last 4 years? It's the anti-DEI. It's the anti-ESG. It's the sort of the woke lash, the backlash against the perception things have gone too far. And it's, for that matter, a fight within the young left versus the older left, the younger left being more supportive of Hamas and more critical of Israel than many of their older counterparts, which helps bring you Donald Trump. Why is this going to stop? When they cut a deal and Trump says, all right, we're ending the sanctions against Vladimir Putin's Russia, and you businesses, you should invest. Think there's going to be activism about that? When the deportation kind of kicks up more and it starts having, much more visible impacts, God forbid, but likely violence. Think there's going to be backlash against that? Pressure's coming. You're already seeing some Republican congresspersons' town halls see backlash against people who are unhappy they're losing services. The real resistance, though, is going to come from the states. 38 states are entirely run by Republicans or entirely run by Democrats. You see those states passing different policies. So, for example, you will not be able to sell a gasoline-powered car in California starting in 2035. I'm going with Texas will never have that same legislation. The states are pushing in contrary directions, but the blue states are going to push against the Trump administration in the same way the red states pushed against the Obama and the Biden administrations. The chart here shows you the frequency of multi-state, so multiple attorneys general from around the country ganging up to stop and block in court. They did it against George W. Bush, and that slowed down the war on terror. They did it against Barack Obama, and that slowed down his clean power plan. They did it against Donald Trump the first time when he tried to get rid of DACA. They did it against Joe Biden on the student loan debt relief. It's already happened. There are already 10 cases in the first 30 whatever days against Donald Trump. This will only continue. They're going to fight in courts. What might alter Trump's plans? Well, he's always been pretty sensitive to financial markets. His first term, whenever he would walk out of the Oval Office, he would turn to Dan Scavino, a deputy chief of staff, and say, "How we doing, Dan?" And by that, he was referring to the Fox Business Channel that he'd have playing with the ticker, the market ticker. Trump sees the financial markets as a barometer of, is he doing a good job? When the markets are bleeding lots, hundreds of points every day, and the reason is that markets are really concerned, for example, about the tariffs that surprised everybody that were going to be imposed in February 1, he took a little bit extra time there. He's going to either announce new things or adjust the things he's announced if it's really causing financial market pain. President wants to be popular, and he knows who he's not going to be popular with. It really matters, particularly with his base, if he's popular. But he is reactive to how's it playing, what are people saying. I mentioned judicial review. This remains the strongest of the checks and balances out there. There have been some injunctions, and we'll see what gets to the Supreme Court. The people who keep talking about a constitutional crisis, we'll see if we get there or not. If the Supreme Court says you cannot do something and the administration says, how many guns do you have? That's a constitutional crisis. God forbid it gets there. For now, though, we're seeing a lot of the executive orders and a lot of the early measures getting litigated and often getting blocked. God forbid are there going to be violent events. There was a lot of business engagement with the administration until Charlottesville. The murder of George Floyd really did change the environment for policy and politics and for businesses. There's some dangerous countries around the world, and we don't know what they're going to do. I think the biggest barrier, however, may be, to quote Hamilton, you don't got the votes. The margin for the House of Representatives for the Republicans, 220 to 215, and that was the election margin. Right now it's even smaller because of some vacancies. But assuming everybody's in the seat that got elected in 2020, it's net 5. So it's 5. So if you lose 3 votes, then you lose 217 to 218. They're going to lose 3 votes on the Mother's Day resolution. How they get every Republican on board, defense hawks, fiscal hawks, the Freedom Caucus guys who want the government to shrink by multiple trillions of dollars, the moderates who don't want the government to shrink by multiple trillions of dollars, or at least not, in social welfare programs. I think so much that we've seen in the first 30 to 40 days has been executive action. When you need to pass things, they got the budget resolution out of the House, to be fair, Trump's got a lot of sway, but can he bring everybody on sides every time? I don't know. We're going to see. I'm going to end with 3 recommendations, and I'll finish. I'll have used 30 minutes, and we'll then have time for the next 3. First, what worked last time? We should revisit that. For business leaders, owning the relationship at the CEO level, there is no substitute. People like Secretary Lutnick, who's a billionaire business dude, former CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald at Commerce, he likes to talk to CEOs, less so to people like me. If you're going to go in, don't say, Mr. President, you don't understand trade. Say, we want to make America first too, and here's how what we need on trade or on geopolitics, here's how that aligns with what you care about. If you're visiting this president, you're in a negotiation, and he's going to have an ask of you, so be willing and ready to negotiate. As noted, deepen your planning processes. Who is your team that thinks about supply chain or thinks about tariff risks? They need to be meeting regularly. They need to include your government relations. They need to include your communications people. The company is not an NGO. It's not run by your left-wingers. It's not run by your right-wingers. Your employees matter immensely, but they shouldn't dictate what you do. Be careful about what you say publicly. There's just no reason to get in a pissing match with people in politics whose entire job is to be in public pissing matches. Maybe that's what you do for a living, but most of you don't. So try to avoid confrontational public statements. Stay bipartisan. Play the long game. This administration, all administrations come and go. All Congresses come and go. It's going to change. When you think about stakeholder engagement, the way you win is you're inclusive, preemptive, selective, and not performative. It's a 4-part strategy. Part number 1, team. Who's thinking about how we engage on a lot of these issues? If it's just comms and the CEO, that's not good enough. It should be diverse in people's roles, in people's backgrounds, and in people's ideology. People who are more left of center and more right of center. Externally, there's few times when it's a good business practice to be out there all by yourself on some of these social and culture and political issues. Move with the herd. Process. The team that I described ought to practice. So for example, just one easy foreseeable thing, the president and Vladimir Putin cut a deal on the Ukraine war ending, which is accepted ultimately by Ukraine and others. But part of the deal is the sanctions go away, and the president says, I've instructed Marco Rubio to lead a trade mission to Moscow, and pressure is put on you businesses. Are you going to participate? Your first thought is, well, hell no. But how are you going to approach that? How are you going to respond? How are you going to react? You're going to say something, you're not going to say something. Who are the other business associations you want to work with? When people ask you to support or oppose legislation, have you read it? Do you understand the arguments on both sides? Is it something that fits? It's a lot more important to speak to your employees than for your employees. So think very carefully about how often you engage with your stakeholders. It shouldn't be only when they're coming to you saying, here's something that's happening in the world and we want you to weigh in. If that's the only time you engage, since the answer to that's going to be no more often than yes, you're going to piss them off. But if they felt heard, if they feel like you listen to them all the time, if you found a bunch of actions you can take to demonstrate our commitment to what they care about that aren't high profile, super public things, you build the bank of goodwill. And when they say you need to weigh in on the affirmative action court case, you could say, I appreciate how upset you are. Diversity matters to us. Inclusion matters to us. That's why we're supporting these scholarship programs. That's why our recruiting efforts go above and beyond. But, complaining about a Supreme Court case as the decision's already happened doesn't actually accomplish stuff. We're into actions, not words. When we talk about decisions, it ought to be about value to the organization, not our values. If you're an airline, support sustainable aviation fuel, not because you have grandchildren and you want the world to be nice for them, although I hope you do if you have grandkids, but because the single most important question for the profitability of an airline is whether or not our most variable and expensive cost energy can somehow be brought down or made more predictable. That's why we're investing in sustainable aviation fuel. You're making the world better by the investment, but one way to talk about it makes you a punching bag, and the other way makes you a visionary leader. What you do matters more than what you tweet. think early. Who should we partner with so that when the political issue that we looked at, we observed is coming down the pike, when that pops, we're already working with organizations quietly that are making a difference. Last slide, last point. You got to show up. I showed you the slide early on, how the complete lack of trust in institutions. Something that I spend a lot of time looking at all that data, and here's something I find fascinating. When you look at who's trusted and who's not, 80% plus of people polled say throw all the bums out, get rid of Congress. But those same polls have more than 50% consistently say, but not my representative. I like my representative. Nobody trusts big business, according to the Gallup data, but the Edelman data say when people are asked about institutions and one of the choices is my employer, that's the most trusted institution. None of us trust mass media. We know they're a business. We know they're incentivized to outrage, but we trust the Substackers we read. We trust the podcasters we choose to listen to. National economy, people say, oh my God, it's a total disaster. How am I doing? I'm doing great. I'm going to be fine. The other party, destroying America's way of life. My next door neighbor in the other party, great guy, loves dogs, loves children, watches my house, trust him with my life. Why the distinction? My theory is we don't trust the things that we perceive from afar, that are presented via the mass media, who again, whose incentive are, if it bleeds, it leads, to make us stressed and angry and upset and outraged. By contrast, the things we experience firsthand, offline, in real life, are things we trust. All trust is local. If you are a business, if you are advising a business, how do they get to know you for who you are? I would argue it starts with face-to-face, makes an immense amount of difference. Beyond that, so show up. You don't phone it in with your customers. You go see your customers. Well, we're in an era of high unpredictability, of high political risk. See your members of Congress. Know who they are. They should know who you are. Have them come visit your factory. Go and make sure they understand what you're doing, how you're impacting things locally. Who are your local, who are others that you partner with? Engage them on your behalf too. I'm going to stop sharing my slides. I note this last one has that QR code. If you have enjoyed this insane amount of slides presented quite quickly over lunch, you'll like my free Substack, which comes out Sunday mornings. If this is the last thing in the world you want to see, definitely do not sign up for my Substack because it's a lot more of the same and you won't enjoy it. I'm happy to take questions, Tom. I think we have 20-ish minutes, and I'm ready to go.
For those of you watching from home, there is a Q&A widget to the right of this screen where you can submit your questions for Bruce. Bruce, our first question says, you've mentioned that administrations come and go. Do you believe that this will really be the case with this particular administration?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% positive they will go. In terms of the Constitution's crystal clear, and to amend the Constitution takes far more than they're going to be able to get. Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris, but he didn't quite crack 50% of the popular vote. Not near the types of margins one needs for a constitutional amendment. So 4 years is the max for these folks. Might J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or someone else succeed them in the way that George H.W. Bush succeeded Ronald Reagan? Yep, they might. But things evolve, things change. One of the slides I didn't bring shows the Republican-Democrat partisan alignment in the Senate, the House, and the White House. So kind of blue, red, blue, or whatever. Every 2 years for the last 12 years, it has changed. So the odds that the Republicans are going to hold the House in the upcoming 2026 midterms, very, very, very low. If somebody offers you an even money, bet, you don't have to give odds, you don't have to give points. Take the bet. The Democrats are going to pick up the House. They only need to net 3 of every midterm election since the end of World War II. When there have been 18 to the 20 times, the party that doesn't hold the White House has picked up far more than 3. There were only twice that the party holding the White House actually gained seats. In 1998, peace, prosperity, the internet bubble, or the internet boom at the time, and 2002 after 9/11. So It's sure, everything I think I know says they've got 2 more years as a trifecta, and I don't know what's going to happen in the 2028 presidential. But it won't be Donald Trump against Joe Biden.
Next question here says, how specifically are you advising clients to prepare for the administration going after private sector DEI and ESG initiatives? Is it focused on value, not values?
Well, look, so the thing we've been advising folks the most is I don't know any business that thinks diversity or inclusion are bad. I think everyone recognizes if you want to get and maintain and continue to attract and retain top talent, you want a more diverse organization, you want a more inclusive organization. But there's a difference between making them priorities and sort of beating your chest and talking about how committed you are to them. If you do the latter, you're going to get shot at, they're going to come after you, they're going to pick a fight with you. You may conclude that you cannot have a diverse and inclusive organization unless you are aggressively, performatively out there talking about those as goals. My organization, we're half Democrats, half Republicans. It turns out we're half male and half female among our lobbying ranks. It's not on my website. I'm not out there giving speeches. It's how we live. It's what we care about, and it impacts everything we do and we think about. But we're not trying to make a point publicly in what we say. We're trying to make an impact in what we do. So what I've been advising a lot of clients is scrub what you say and how you say it. And whether it's in annual statements you put out or it's on the web, if you have the letters DEI and succession, ESG, the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, expect you may have people coming to, Robbie Starbuck and activists may be coming after you outside of government, or people inside government may be coming after you in ways that maybe that helps your mission. Maybe that helps your business succeed. Most businesses I know say we don't want to give up on diversity. We don't want to give up on inclusion. I'm not picking on the equity now. That sometimes gets a little bit more complicated in how people feel about it. But everybody, I hope I don't work for any business, any client that doesn't believe in diversity and inclusion. And for those, our advice is full speed ahead in so many of the initiatives that we're focused on that the legal guys tell us remain legal. But let's, if you're willing, change the words we use, scrub a little bit, and stop making this the first thing we need people to know about us, even though we're fully committed to making it happen in who we hire, in how we train people, and how we make sure people work well together.
Next question, what are your views on how Make America Healthy Again will impact the food and restaurant industry?
Yeah, man, I'm watching that really closely. It's first, put my cards on the table. I believe in vaccines. I'm horrified that there's the measles death and the outbreak in Texas. It's not going to be, I fear, the last death. And centuries of science seem to be at risk. At the same time, I would commend the following book to people who are interested in this topic at the macro level. It's called Blind Spots by Dr. Marty Makary, who is a pancreatic cancer surgeon at Hopkins, but he was just nominated to be an FDA commissioner. He's not a MAGA guy. He's not a political guy. He's not a Trump guy. But his book is brilliant. It's an easy read, and it goes through multiple examples where kind of the public health community was completely convinced of a fact, and anybody who disagreed was anti-science. First, that peanut allergies were best prevented by complete avoidance and abstinence until people were age 3. Turns out that's the exact opposite of correct medical advice, even though the entire medical community was convinced of it, and those who disagreed were told they were kooks. Hormone replacement therapy for women. There was a study that turns out isn't even that reliable and credible that suggested there is potentially a higher risk of breast cancer. Not so. Meanwhile, there's an immense amount of medical research that shows how great HRT can be to deal with menopause, which is brutal if you've been through it, or you have a spouse who's going through it, or you have a parent or a daughter who will at some point. All those benefits you weren't allowed to talk about the fact that maybe we're getting it wrong. And, and the same with antibiotics. And so I start with a little bit more open-mindedness, not about the anti-vax, but about the idea that the Make America Healthy Again movement has adherents for a reason, and they're not all completely bonkers. The idea that maybe super processed food has a causal connection to America's obesity epidemic, that has a causal connection, along with portion size, but has a causal connection to a lot of the chronic health conditions. That's not crazy. I think this administration is going to be way more aggressive at trying to unearth studies, conduct studies, and look for evidence that a lot of the things that have kind of been accepted and untouched, these guys are looking for evidence that maybe they're not so right. I worry a little bit that, like RFK Jr., the Secretary of HHS, that he kind of starts with a conclusion in mind and he wants that to be found. He wants to prove certain things. So it just means to me, if you're in the food business or the restaurant business, expect a whole lot more scrutiny, expect a lot more airing of studies that question what you do and how you do it. Maybe what we will ultimately conclude is, nope, ultra processing is awesome and it's no problem. Or maybe we'll conclude that that the food industry or the health industry or others have actually been ignoring things that are problems. So I'd have my head on the proverbial swivel, and I would be, I'd be maybe looking at some of the things that movement has out there. Not the total kookery, but look at some of the stuff that's not quite so kooky, but that has been dismissed, but maybe is going to make a comeback, and think about, well, if that comes back, what does it mean for me? Both to plan for how you might adjust, number one. Number two, because maybe if it's right, then you should adjust on behalf of your customers. Or number three, because if you're going to engage in advocacy, that's the fight that's coming.
Great. Next question here. Any particular views on possible near-term policy decisions related to the Inflation Reduction Act and tax credits for solar energy business?
Yeah, the tax credit fight gets the nerd term in Washington, reconciliation, but that's where the tax battle and the tax fight's going to happen. So it's the Inflation Reduction Act was passed via reconciliation with only Democratic votes. The Trump tax cuts were passed via reconciliation with only Republican votes. The next tax bill, which will put very much on the table all of the green tax credits. A lot of Republicans start predisposed to want to kill the green tax credits. Trump hates windmills, as I noted. He doesn't seem quite as anti-solar per se, but I think he likes what he perceives as the kind of the culture war street cred of going after climate stuff. And so in that regard, a lot of the clients that we work with that see a benefit in a lot of these tax credits, maybe because they're in the electricity generation business, or maybe because they're in the AI business, they're going to have to show up. They're going to have to make their case. They're going to have to fight for why these credits, like the fossil fuel credits, are smart ways to approach things. I'm not writing them off, not least because an energy dominance goal, which is what Secretary Wright at Energy and what the president say, if you actually want an energy dominance approach to the world, you need an all of the above strategy. And if you actually want to confront the ways in which China is increasing both their soft power and their economic power, you don't want to leave all of the solar industry to China.
How should we think of DOJ's interest in collecting business and personal data and information?
I'm scared. I'm nervous. The idea writ large that an administration decides they're going to come in and they want to revisit how government operations work. They want to pare down the size of the government by 10%. I might be all in favor of, particularly if they say, let's figure out who the weakest 10% of the performers are and fire them. Let's find things that are anachronistic or lower efficiency and improve them. I'm all for that. The approach to date has been figure out who's easiest to fire and fire them. So it's provisional employees. A lot of provisional employees were the highest performers who had recently been promoted into a new role because they're so good. But when you get promoted, you're suddenly provisional again in the rules that the employee unions and others to protect federal workers put in place. So ironically, a lot of the people getting fired are the best performers. In the same way, if there were an effort to gather as much data as possible to try to figure out where's the government sending all of its money? How do we make the U.S. aid grants a little bit more transparent? So maybe we can see some of them, which really do seem like an interest, like a use of taxpayer dollars that most Americans wouldn't favor. Helping the Sri Lankan press be better about, some of this, the gender identification stuff in their press. I mean, that's a nice, worthy thing, but should we be paying taxes for that, or should that be private sector? I don't know. That's a useful question. So given the way they are approaching firing people, I'm really worried about whether they're maintaining privacy and other protections in place on some of the data they've got. I'll take them at their word. Their goal is a useful goal. We should be able to operate this country at fewer than $6 to $7 trillion a year. I mean, it is outrageous, but it's a shoot first, aim second approach to firing, which has me really worried. It's a shoot first, aim second approach to data management. I don't know that directly. I can see the firing. I don't know exactly what they're doing with data, but I'm concerned as a citizen, and I know a lot of political figures are concerned for that reason.
Okay, we have time for just a few more questions here. Let's see. Do you believe President Trump will follow through on tariffs with Canada, or is Northern Arctic sovereignty more likely the negotiating tool for Canada?
Will there be some tariffs on Canada? Yeah, I think there will. Will they be across the board? Harder to see. But he's going to bring this club out of the bag again and again and again. Are the Canadians going to always give him something every time? Maybe. It feels to me that there will be some tariffs. I don't think we're going to get into a full-fledged long-term trade war with Canada, but there may be some number of ultimately products or some periods of time when aluminum and steel, for example, where I'm not sure they get turned off. So yes, I think there will be tariffs on Canada. Absolutely, we will have fire drills about tariffs on Canada a lot. And long term, I don't think it will be sort of like the new China, where there'll just be a permanent double-digit level of tariffs that is just the new normal.
We have two more questions here. The next being, do you think that companies will no longer be able to highlight female leadership development programs or similar for fear of being seen as discriminatory practices?
Well, I probably should have noted, maybe Tom sort of kind of did, like, I'm giving you my best guesses at everything. So start with the caveat of, I actually don't know anything about anything. With that said, I think businesses will absolutely continue to have development programs to try to make sure younger employees, and particularly employees from groups that historically don't have the same mentorships and pipeline programs, have good mentorships and have good pipelines. I think if companies have explicit racial or gender quotas, I think they're at legal risk. Again, talk to your lawyers, but I think you're at legal risk if you have a straight up quota. So if you can continue to have programs that aren't pure play, the only person who's allowed to have this job is a woman of color, for example, I think you should be legal. I think smart businesses are going to want to continue to have mentorship efforts that are helpful, particularly where they're most needed. And so it kind of then just gets to the last part of the question, how they talk about them. Seems to me the more you talk about them in a loud, public, and external way, the more likely you are to face scrutiny and attacks, whether it's outside activist Robbie Starbuck or if you have any business that's government facing. The more you do them, the more you make sure that they are availed of by your employees who can benefit from them, I think the more progress you make. With all of these things, I would note, like when I gave my strategy for approaching them, a huge thing to remember is B2B is different than B2C. If you're B2C, you're at most brand and consumer risk. B2B, a lot less so. If you're B2B, but you're a defense contractor, your number one customer is the government, led by whoever is in office right now, who will regularly have, sharp ears and thin skin. I think if I'm those guys, I am a lot more careful about what I say, how I say it, and what's public, as opposed to if I'm Patagonia and I am publicly loud and proud about supporting environmentalism, great. That's good for my brand. I'm not going to lose any Patagonia customers over that. I'll gain some. So, all of this requires the nuancing of who are you and where do you fit in the ecosystem.
Thanks so much, Bruce. We'll go to the last question now. What advice do you have for CEOs that have not been active in Washington?
If you haven't been active in Washington, it may be worth, the first thing I would do is I would want a holistic assessment. What are the risks? What are the rewards? I wouldn't just say I've never been, I'm never going to be. That'd be like saying, well, we've never used AI before, so screw it. Sometimes the world changes, and you better figure out if it's time to change with the world. So I would want to have done, and we've done that on behalf of some organizations that are interested in, should we be more engaged in government relations? Should we adjust our strategies? Put together a pro and con, a comprehensive benefit risk analysis. Figure out if we're going to do it, how should we do it? Who's done it effectively? Who might we model after? I wouldn't just go headlong into, I'm going to go 1 week a month and just hang and meet people. You ought to have a strategy. You ought to know what a win is. There ought to be a goal to it. My own belief, though, is the risk level is higher. We're in an environment, particularly with the administration, where CEOs bring a different and more firepower than most. I tend to think stakeholder engagement at this level is part of the C-suite's job. And we're at a time now where most boards I know expect their CEO to be more engaged, but it ought to be driven by a strategy that starts with an environmental assessment of risks and rewards, of the strategic approaches that do make sense and that don't make sense. Last thing is, I love every CEO on this call. I love every one of you, but just because you know how to run a business doesn't mean you're good at government relations or good in a meeting with the government stakeholder. I'm really good in the meeting with a government stakeholder, and I would be a disaster in the C-suite for a lot of companies because I don't have the experience with the P&L and operating it all. When you decide the risks outweigh the rewards outweigh the risks that we need to engage, when you decide we've got an aggressive strategy, don't just show up and figure you'll figure it out on the fly. I think there are ways to prepare. You don't just show up for the biggest customer opportunity you've ever had for a sale. Maybe you wing it. Maybe you're that good. Jamie Dimon's that good. Most people aren't that good. So I would want to, war game, practice, prepare, bring in people like me, but like whomever who can, there are plenty of bipartisan firms like ours who can help you prepare and who can help make sure that you go into this thing where it's not your first of these conversations and you leave and think, boy, I could do that a lot better next time. You'll still takes a little while to get better, but too many folks just show up, shoot, and then figure out how to aim.
Thank you so much for your insights today, Bruce. And thank you everyone for being a part of the discussion. A replay will be made available shortly, and we hope that you will all continue to be a part of the ICR Conference Spotlight Series in 2025. Thanks again, Bruce, for your time.
Thanks for having me.